What is going on, YouTube? Thank you for tuning in to our live Q&A. We missed last week. We're back this week. As you guys know, what we do is we go through as many questions as we can and try to answer them as objectively as we can. Sometimes that doesn't mean necessarily there's always a great answer, but this is a pure Q&A based kind of thing. So if you have questions, drop them in the comments. And of course, we will get to them and make sure that everyone has an answer, or at least we can do it while we have time and, depending on how many questions come in. But how you doing, Adam?
Good, man. Good. How are you? Things are, heating up as usual. Lots of guys competing, but going well.
Yeah. This time of year is fucking busy, man. I can't believe how many people are competing. And I've been on calls and just talking to people. And I'm realizing don't think I've ever been this busy before in my entire life, like with the amount of people competing all at once. In November, I think I have 12 people competing already, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, dude, I've lost count at this point in time. It's almost thinking, I can kind of understand why some coaches just give people their plan. Like, as your people, you kind of piss off because it becomes a nightmare when you have multiple people wake you up, sending you photos every morning or whatever for their check-ins, and you try to make adjustments for everyone. But it's
dude, it gets so hectic, man. It gets so hectic when you just finish one person's thing and you're like, oh fuck, finally done, and then another person's like, coach, this is wrong, and I'm like, oh fuck, and then I gotta go again. It's just constant, but it's what it is.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was talking about with another friend of mine / coach. It was like, are you a coach first or you're a bodybuilder first? Because I was talking about how yesterday, I was doing check-ins and doing, some prep stuff with some clients till almost, I think it was 9:30 at night, and the gym closes here. I was factory at 10, and I didn't go to gym, and I was a bit pissed about that. But I was like, yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at now. I kind of have to be a coach first and a bodybuilder second, which kind of sucks. But I think it's kind of what you got to do.
Yeah, dude, it's so funny you say that, because I've been in the same mindset lately. I've been I remember even today it was just I had 9 calls today, and each call usually lasts 30 to an hour, depending on which. It's I can't go to the gym, right? If I go to the gym, I won't have time to do anything else, respond to clients, et cetera, et cetera. So it's I have to take that time,
Yeah, exactly. So it's a tough one. Look, I think, if you want to, I think you kind of, I think there's lots of examples of fantastic coaches and bodybuilders. John Jewett's a good example, but I do think that you can't be amazing at everything. So you gotta pick a few things, and obviously bodybuilding is a huge commitment. I also think your coaching to an extent is a huge commitment if you're a good coach, that is, or at least you try to be. And you kind of have to pick one and choose okay, that's what I'm gonna go hard at, and that's what I'm gonna prioritize. And I guess it's okay, but I think we all love bodybuilding, we all love training, but putting them on the back seat, at least for me, hurts a bit. But you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, dude, it's nice to be huge and shit, but it's at the same time, we kind of talked about this before. It's nice to also have security in life and be able to understand that you're doing good work for other people. There's some benefit in that, of course. It's just you can't follow the one passion, but there's other passions that you're fulfilling at the same time. So it's kind of what it is. You get to live vicariously through other people. And I know I have clients who are way better than I could ever be, and living through them and seeing their experiences, just as fun in some capacity. So
I definitely agree. My Shadow Pro card is definitely not going to be myself.
yeah, it's probably not going to happen at this point, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Another odd thing, I've gotten a lot of powerlifters and strongmen recently who want to get onboarded, and I'm like, guys, it's an interesting concept, and I love working with you guys, but at the same time, I only have so much capacity, and if I'm being honest, it's not my specialty. And so it's been an interesting thing. I've had probably 6 or 7 guys who are pretty 800-pound squats, 795-pound deadlift kind of shit, hitting me up, and I'm like, this is awesome. We just signed on one today, but it is crazy the amount of people who are competing this time of year in just everything. So there's bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman. All the competitions are just finishing up at this end of the year. So you got like strongman competitions, bodybuilding competitions. Like, I like to take a weekend off here and there, but it's like this time it's just like, holy shit, man. I'm just going straight through it, balling out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, interesting you say, that one of my favorite clients, shout out to Mitch, is actually a strongman competitor who's
he's great.
looking to get towards strongest man in one nationals. And I think, we don't claim to be specialists in, strongman training and the performance side of things. But it comes to pharmacology and nutrition, I think a lot of that can be similar. Don't get me wrong. Pharmacology for hypertrophy and pharmacology for strength and endurance is different. But I think that's where, at least we can still step in and help. I mean, speak to Mitch yourself. We've had pretty damn good results, and he was natural for a long period of time. And that was just, finding supplement protocols which assist with. But yeah, it's cool working with these guys, I would say.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is I'm like, I don't want to do your training because I'm not even going to pretend like I know any versing in programming for that. But I'll manage the drugs and food, and we'll call that.
Yes, that's like, pretty much it. Yeah, drugs, food, blood work, supplements. That's it.
Exactly. I'll do all those things. What's up, Felipe? I always appreciate you tuning in, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, man, what's up?
Most content space you provide for us. Appreciate you and the gang in the Discord. Hell yeah, brother. What's up, Samantha? What's your guys' opinion on consuming fat while using exogenous insulin? Justin Harris and John Jewett both said that when you consume fat, you are spiking insulin in the same way, and what matters is the total amount of calories. Others, like Kurt and Dr. Scott, believe that it is no good and is easy to store fat. This is a very hard question. There's a lot of I'm even lost in the weeds and a little bit of the lipidology here, because there's some science that would suggest that if you eat a lot of saturated fats, that actually causes insulin resistance that's localized to muscle tissue, as well as when you have capped off intramuscular triglycerides, that also causes insulin resistance within muscle tissue. So the saying would be, you generally want to have lower fats, because if you have an abundance of fats and you cause these issues, it could be bad. But I've also seen data that presents fats decrease insulin resistance, and omega-3 fatty acids improve response to insulin and different things. So I actually don't know, to be honest. I generally have people stay away from it just because, in a certain sense, the way I think about it at like a base level is insulin is an anti-catabolic hormone, essentially. And if we want to cause anabolism in muscle tissue, we might as well eat things that contribute to muscle tissue. If we're eating fat, we're really causing an anti-catabolic system. So we're storing fat. Anytime you eat fat, you're storing fat. And then it's liberated later on to be used as energy. But if you're just constantly conserving that energy because you have high levels of insulin, and then you're contributing to that fat, I can see there being like an energy distribution error there, in a sense, because you are anabolizing a lot of fat tissue as well as muscle tissue. But I also could see it happening with higher carbohydrates. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. So good question. It's an interesting one. I have a similar take on it too. This is the way I see it. So one, what's going to determine if you get fat overall is going to be the size of your caloric surplus. So if you are, for example, having a caloric surplus of, let's say, 200 to 300 calories and a caloric surplus of like 800 to 1,000 calories, okay, if you're using insulin with 200 to 300 calories, you're not going to put on more fat than if you were having a really large surplus, even if the distribution of your fat intake with the smaller surplus is larger, okay? So I think the overall caloric amount is going to be the greatest factor with how much body fat you put on. However, we know that, carbohydrates get broken down. Glucose is more stored as muscle glycogen, whereas, when it comes to fat intake, it's more likely to be stored as adipose tissue. The chances of fat in a caloric surplus to undergo gluconeogenesis and be stored as glycogen is much lower than carbohydrates. So if you are using exogenous insulin and you're in a surplus, I would surmise, or I would think that if you have a higher fat content, at least in your diet, that's more likely to be stored as adipose tissue. Again, I think the overall surplus is most important. So, just because, some person is in a 200-calorie surplus and eating 100 grams of fat, and another person is eating 50 grams of fat, he's in a 1,500-calorie surplus. I think the larger surplus is going to have more fat on them just because the surplus is too excessive. But I do think that if they were equal, okay, and you have two people each in a 300-calorie surplus, but one is majority eating higher fat content and lower carbohydrates, I think the person eating the higher fat content is more likely to store that fat as adipose tissue. Additionally to that, like you said, like Colin just said, insulin is a storage hormone. So you have to think about how each of these macronutrients are stored. Amino acids from protein typically goes to tissue to repair, glucose, glycogen, and then fat typically has adipose tissue. So and also in furthering that point too, we know from the majority of data that high fat diets aren't optimal for sports performance. I'm not saying you can't build muscle on a ketogenic diet. I'm not saying you can't build muscle on a carnivore diet. I'm just saying that if you want to go with what we know from at least the majority of the research out there, that it's going to be optimal for performance, biasing carbohydrates is going to be optimal. In conjunction to that, we know that growth hormone, testosterone, insulin all have a synergistic effect around glucose and glucose uptake. So it's like, why wouldn't you prioritize? Why wouldn't you prioritize carbohydrate intake? So even if it's not about storing fat, it's about what's going to be optimal for performance, recovery, and hypertrophy. And I would say carbohydrates. So I think there's more research, or at least more evidence to suggest you would bias carbohydrates not just for storing less body fat, but just for performance benefits.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think the big thing is, like, I've prepped on insulin before. My last prep, I used insulin, the Humalog. I didn't it didn't inhibit me losing fat. It was the overall calories that were really the big equation there. But I think, if you're in a caloric surplus, then the ratio really starts to matter, and you can kind of question whether things are deleterious or not. My brain definitely expands during these lives. That's great. Turbo Jim Bro. I love this username, bro. It's sick. Is the steroids stop working after X weeks and you need to come back to TRT to resensitize a myth? I would think your cycle would only stop working due to toxicity. Turbo Jim Bro, you are absolutely intelligent. Yes. Yeah. Go for it, Adam.
Yeah, talk about off-season cycle with healthier compounds, not contest prep. Correct. I don't think your androgen receptors downregulate. In fact, I think we have evidence suggesting that larger you get, and the more anabolics you use, the more likely your androgen receptors upregulate.
Yeah,
that can be especially true if you're using something like injectable carnitine, which has some evidence behind that increases androgen receptor density, etc. But that aside, correct. I do not believe you need TRT to resensitize, and we've spoke about this before. That typically, what assuming you are a competitive bodybuilder, you want to put as much muscle mass as possible, just a bodybuilder who wants to get as large as possible. The thing that should be, causing you to go to drop to TRT or quote unquote a health phase is correct your health markers. Because, if all your health markers are looking good, blood pressure, fasting glucose, resting heart rate, all the various, markers on your blood work are looking good. And you're, gaining tissue at a good rate, there's no other side effects. Why would you stop? If you're trying to build as much muscle as possible, it's as we've discussed before, it's going to be something that affects your health. So it's not that it's not that you need to be resensitized. It's usually something related to health. So yeah, I agree. You don't need to resensitize yourself. It's usually health-related reasons why you need to take a break from things. We've seen it before with friends of ours who put on a lot of tissue, okay, and for health reasons, need to go into a maintenance phase or slow down that rate of gain. So yeah, it's almost 90% of the time due to health reasons, not that the drugs stop working. If you're taking 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, it doesn't just stop working after a while. Sure, you may hit a plateau with you're having to increase food intake, maybe training stimulus, but it's still working, that's for sure. So yeah, long story short, you do not have to resensitize yourself.
Yeah, there's like that old lore that's kind of like short cycles are best because you have to resensitize yourself, and then also myostatin inhibition to growth will happen at a certain point. But the reality is like the more androgens you use, the greater sensitivity you have to androgens, and likely the greater androgen receptor density that you have as well, which is ideal. But I don't know if that's necessarily exactly happening because unfortunately, like no one does tests on bodybuilders and like biopsies and shit like this, but it would be
Yep.
really cool to see. But you are safe. You can, our method, like Adam just said, is run as long as you possibly can under the premise that your health is not deviating or completely destroyed or deteriorating, and you feel good, for sure. Felipe asks, is there any situation where it makes sense to combine both Masteron and Primobolan while on testosterone, or is it better to take Primo instead of adding Masteron? Another good question.
Yeah.
I would say there's maybe a situation in which you would do one or the other. That would be like if you prefer using DHTs, Primobolan is highly estrogen suppressing for you. And if you use an abundance of Primobolan, you'll have very low estrogen. So then you have to, sort of use Masteron to fill in the DHT gap provided from the lack of Primobolan. I could see that being a very realistic case. Outside of that, most of the time I would leverage Primobolan. The one personal anecdote I do have is that I find Masteron generally creates like a grainier look to skin when people are leaner, but this is completely subjective and there's nothing I can say that makes that a legitimate scientific fact, right? So that's the only reason I would think it'd be good.
Yeah. I have to agree that, the situation I would think of is similar to yourself, where, because, typically if you're in an off-season phase, right, I do have a client like this where he takes like 50 milligrams of Primo and it literally causes the estradiol to massively, downregulate, or rather, it has a strong anti-aromatizing effect, so much so that I think he was running like 450 milligrams of testosterone and 50 milligrams of Primo, and his estradiol was like middle of the reference range, which was pretty wild. In that sense, adding more Primobolan potentially would crush his estradiol, and if we wanted to add another DHT, we could look at Masteron. But then in his case, I would add more testosterone. However, if he went into a contest prep and we didn't want more testosterone, okay, we wanted, as you said, the dry, grainier look, but then we didn't want to crash his estradiol, well, that basically just leaves Masteron left over. In which case, in his case, I would add Masteron, because more Primobolan would crush his estradiol, more testosterone may lead to a less of a dry, quote unquote, look, and that Masteron would be the go-to. The other examples would just be like financial or access, like you don't have access to more Primobolan, it's financially costing a lot, or as you just mentioned, Felipe, that it's causing a lot of PIP, because as you well know, Primobolan often is, concentrated at 100 milligrams per mil, or the higher dosages, anecdotally for a lot of people at like 200 milligrams per mil, causes a lot of post-injection pain. And just to avoid the post-injection pain, you would use maybe Masteron instead, because it has a higher concentration and there's less, oil to inject, and potentially you just get less PIP from it. So in those circumstances, I would. But from a pure like pharmacological point of view, like, is there some synergy between the two? Probably say no. I mean, you could make the argument that because Masteron was used for breast cancer in women, that maybe there's an affinity to block or reversely bind androgen receptors at the nipple site. So maybe it might be better preventing gynecomastia. Obviously, your overall estradiol levels, I think, are most important. But there is an argument for that. But other than that, I don't think there's any other reason to combine them.
For sure. Beautiful answer. And I also, about the budget, that's a really big one too. I didn't even consider, but that would be another one where I could see you like using 100 milligrams of Remobolan a week, because they're like $20 ampules. And then, filling the rest with Masteron. Just Beige asks, off-season cycle, thinking testosterone, Primobolan, NPP. What would the ratios be if we were to start test at 300 per week? Boy, very hard question to answer, because it's so broad. But if let's just say I took myself and did this, because that's probably the best way to explain this. I would do, if I was only doing 300 milligrams of testosterone, I would do probably 100 milligrams of Primobolan, and then another 300 milligrams of NPP. I'm very sensitive to the anti-estrogenic effects, and I generally tolerate estrogen extremely well. And I've talked about how I can go up to like grams of testosterone without any estrogenic side effects. So I would generally keep the Primobolan lower. I would say for most people, generally, if you're like a mild aromatizer, I would say like probably again, such a low dose, like test 300, probably Primo 150, 200, and then NPP 300, somewhere around there.
Yeah, unfortunately, with questions like these, it's literally impossible for us to know without seeing like previous data or blood work. But I'll tell you how, if you were a new client, and how I would approach it if you said to me, these are the compounds I want to run. So firstly, I'd have a discussion with you why you would want to run these compounds. So obviously, test makes sense. Primo, MPP, I'm not against it, but I would say, like, what is the rationale behind the MPP? Now, are you looking for more synovial fluid retention in the joints, give a bit of cushioning? I mean, I feel like the anecdotal evidence I've seen, literally just clients who report back to me, are like kind of 50-50 on this. Some say, yeah, the MPP help. Some say it doesn't, but let's pretend that we've got good reason to use the MPP. What I would first do is implement the testosterone and then find the highest dose of testosterone that you personally can tolerate based on your blood work. So we'd get an LCMS estradiol test, important being LCMS, and we'd see, okay, maybe it's 260 milligrams a week, and that puts your estradiol at, like, 30 or 39 or something like that. And I'm like, okay, from this point on, I'm probably going to have to put a little bit of Primo in. And as Colin said, I would start at a lower amount, like maybe anywhere from 50 to 150 milligrams, somewhere there. See how you're feeling. Ideally, we'll get blood work again, LCMS estradiol test, to see what it is, if we want to be really precise. But yes, we can just, many people just go how they feel. So if they're feeling fine, at that point, I would introduce the MPP at, like, 70 milligrams a week. And then from there, I personally would probably titrate the testosterone and primobolan in the current ratio that they're at, because we know that 300 milligrams of test and 100 milligrams of primo, your estradiol is in range. So I would probably continue in that 3-to-1 ratio. Okay. And then the NPP, yeah, you can scale that, but, like, again, as long as you're not an individual who, like, gets anxiety, gets issues from prolactin, etc., from the NPP, that's how I typically do it. So I personally like to introduce the compounds one at a time, because if we put all three in at once and you start experiencing side effects, how the fuck am I going to know what is causing what? So it's basically a bit of a patient process where you add them one by one, get a couple of estradiol tests, even a prolactin test with MPP, but at that dose, I wouldn't expect that to be elevated, and just see how you react and feel from there. And that's basically how I decide the ratio. But you also have to remember things like, if you're in an off-season phase, changes in body fat level can affect how much you aromatize. So it's not like, oh, we found the ratio, you're done for life. You're always going to do a 3-to-1 ratio of test to DHT. But that's something we'd have to constantly check. And that's how I typically would start it or dial it in.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's a really good explanation too. Since we're a little low on questions, I'm going to ask a question personally, because I just onboarded someone, and let's say they're somewhere around 17% body fat, not really having any visible muscle definition, abs, anything like this. Their goal, they're younger, 20-ish years old, in mid-20s, and their goal is to compete next year in March. They're currently, like I said, a little bit overweight, using about a total conglomeration of like 850 to 900 milligrams of androgens as they're coming to me. Would your first step be to immediately, and they're not by any degree like hypermuscular, so would the first step be in your mind to, with the minimal amount of time that we have, to just consider pushing more weight in attempts to build any sort of substantial muscle mass we can? Or is it cut down aggressively in the jump to maybe hopefully have a little bit of a refeed and rebound later with the minimal amount of time that's had? What would you do in this situation if you were put to this awkward corner?
So I know what I would do, but the problem is how feasible it is, simply because I've been doing an approach which involves a fair bit of growth hormone, and it's obviously very expensive, but it's been working very well. I've done it with probably like 5 or 6 clients now. And basically what I would do is I would first assess how much body fat he has. So how much percentage-wise, if you would estimate, did you say 17%, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we're not like fat as fuck, and we're not exactly lean. What I would potentially try, and has he used growth hormone before?
No, this would be his first time.
Okay, so I'm going to pretend that he just has a lot of finances to back this up, and we can just do whatever we want. What I would actually do is look at a really high dose of growth hormone actually to start off, and put him in a slight caloric deficit. to start off, and then basically make that an aggressive caloric deficit. So maybe we, start off the caloric deficit and then get really aggressive and turn it basically into a mini cut. Strip off as much body fat as possible, with the idea being that the introduction to growth hormone, and his androgens are kind of high anyway, would have a bit of a body recompositioning effect where you could potentially build muscle and lose body fat. I've done this with quite a few clients in a prep phase where they basically go from their off-season phase where androgens are still pretty high and growth hormones quite high. And then the first 6 weeks of prep, I actually try really hard to get them to focus on progressive overload in the gym, really just, continue pushing the training and see if we can actually build some muscle in a slight caloric deficit. So I would basically take a similar approach with them too, where maybe start with a bit of a mild deficit and then aggressively titrate, once all the drugs have reached peak semi concentration levels, or GH, it's pretty much almost immediate. And then after that aggressive mini cut, maybe we've gone from 17 to maybe 14% body fat, somewhere around there, as low as we can. That's when I would basically start slowly titrating the calories up and putting into a quote unquote, gradual surplus or a lean surplus, where we're just trying to gain as much, lean tissue as possible and minimize adipose tissue, so that by the time you get to the show the next year, you don't have you're not 20% body fat and you have a shitload to lose. The only issue I foresee with this guy is that, as you said, right, he's really at 850 milligrams of total androgen. He's not that muscular.
This is his current body composition, just as a indication. Yeah.
See, that's the, to be honest, what is the composition of the androgens? Is it just all test, or?
When he came to me, it was, God, dude, it was crazy. It was 300 milligrams of testosterone, 300 milligrams of Masteron, and 250 milligrams of Trenbolone per week.
Yeah, well, obviously drop the trend. Yeah. Okay. I would drop the trend, add in a fair bit of growth hormone, we're honest, we're transparent here, guys. So I would literally titrate up so he doesn't get a lot of carpal tunnel, but maybe even end up at a dose of 10 IU, no joke, per day, ending up there, right? And again, like I said, I would probably keep the anabolics as is and only besides removing the trend, and then slowly titrate up. And again, the idea is to get a bit of body recompositioning effect, in the sense that we'd lose a bunch of initial fat and then keep them in a gradual surplus, because you have to be in a surplus phase until his comp, because if you just spend a long time getting lean now, then he's going to have fuck all time to build muscle.
Right.
So you kind of basically have to try achieve both at the same time. And I think it is possible when using a fair bit of growth hormone in combination with testosterone and then as needed insulin usage. And I've probably done that with at least 6 or 7 clients now, where I know DEXA scans are not the most accurate, but I've we did DEXA scans, or visually you can see they basically start their end weight after a deficit phase in a surplus with myself end up being the same as their starting weight, but they're leaner and larger, which says to me, at least somewhat objectively, they've gained muscle and lost body fat. And the common denominator there was obviously a huge focus on training, making sure they're getting strong in the gym, progressive overloading, but also a relatively high dose of growth hormone. I'm not saying growth hormone is the holy grail here, but I don't think it would be possible with just androgens alone.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's funny you said that, because one of the first things I was, we were trying to tackle was getting him growth hormone, because my intention is we need to trim off the edges. And the best way I know how to do that is to ideally recomp. And the best drug I know how to do that is growth hormone with, a mild amount of androgens. And you don't need to be taking Trenbolone. You don't need to be taking all this bullshit. And you can still get there. Yeah. Twisted titanium, lose for the fat, build the muscle, get the detail. Absolutely. Nicholas says this guy needs to be more shredded. Yeah. I think that's a big flaw a lot of people have, is they go into a prep or they start plans for a prep that's 8 months out or so, 6 months out or so, and they're already really off track. And it's you really fuck the pooch. The year is tough at that point, because you have all this fat to lose, and then you have to somehow try to manage getting them hypermuscular enough to where they're on stage and presentable. It's just really tough.
Yeah, I have to agree with you guys. If Colton didn't say that he wanted to compete next year, I would say just go into a deficit phase, get super lean first, and then go into a build phase. But when you have that's a problem, right? We're here to facilitate your goals. So if a client comes to us and says, "Hey, I want to complete next year no matter what," well, fuck. It's for us to problem solve and find out how we can do that as possible. Is it going to be always the most optimal? No. I mean, I've had clients come to me and say, "Hey, I want to do an 11-week prep," and it's huh? Okay,
Yeah.
fuck. I don't want to do that, but okay, we can try. So yeah, I have to agree with you. Yes, get lean first, and in an ideal situation, Colton would probably just put him into a caloric gradual caloric deficit, get super lean first. Okay, then slowly add calories back in, rebound out. Drop his anabolic significantly because he doesn't need much to grow at that level of muscle mass, and in growth hormone. But we want to compete next year, middle of next year. So we kind of have to accelerate that time frame. And that's why like a body recompositioning approach is probably going to be more efficient than just, how would, I don't know, 12-week, 16-week deficit to get super shredded. And then that's what, like, fuck, then we're almost at next year, or we're like
exactly.
early next year. And then what, he's got like 3 months to grow, but then he's got his prep. So you would basically be lean, maintain prep, and gain nothing.
Yeah.
So
it really puts you in a tough fucking corner when that shit happens, because it's like there's like only a couple roads we can travel down at this point, and they're not fun either way we go. It's tough. I have a couple people asking if we have an example of, like, I think an example of any clients with the recomp with gear. Yeah. And I mean, I have some. I don't want to like stick through here and just try to like find pictures out of nothing. This is a really good. I can show on. What's that?
I was gonna say I've got a few, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I'll just show one, and then I'm just trying to make sure we keep anonymity quite well here, as best as I can. Let's see if I can even do it.
I can share the ones on my Instagram. The other ones, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's tough because you don't want to be like, I don't know. Sometimes people's professions are like pretty, important and shit. So you don't want to just like bust them out. But there's quite a few where I mean, me and Adam are both pretty fond of the whole, like, higher androgens, lower, or a higher growth hormone, lower androgen kind of recomp. This is one that we just did. I'll share this with you guys. Okay. This is one that we just did. So starting weight and ending weight are practically the same. I will admit that I hadn't coached him from the starting point. I caught him a couple weeks after this, I believe. So, but it was, basically the starting weight and ending weight were identical here. And what was primarily used was, the same kind of protocol we were just talking about, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, well, best example I can give is Kat, actually. If I look at her, we started prep cap. I'm gonna have to do some conversions from kilos to pounds.
Do you have a side by side of her?
Yeah, let me fucking,
because that shit is fucking insane, dude. I still am like reveled in the fact that you guys were able to accomplish this.
Lots of growth hormone.
Yeah, lots of growth hormone.
But to be fair, like we only really touched right. It wasn't like really hard until we touched right up to the last bit, but still though. Okay, so I can share my screen, right?
I think so. Can you? Maybe.
Okay, let me see. So share screen.
This is what she looks like currently. Like
I've got that before and after on my Instagram, but I'm trying to find. I've got my actual metric sheet, which I'm trying to share, so I can show you like what she looked like at the start.
It's insane, dude. Fucking crazy.
Okay.
Like the hamstrings are just like, that is leaner than most men can achieve. That's just wild.
Yeah, we actually had to slow her rate of loss because she's getting too lean, and we don't need strategies for wellness. I'm sharing the screen. So I'll show you where we started at like 60 kilos and where we ended up. Is it sharing?
No. Oh, here we go.
Okay. So this is our starting point, like in January. Okay. Okay, boys can see that. Cool. So this was about 60 kilos, or was it like 100? Let me do the conversion for you guys. That's like 130 pounds, I want to say. 132 pounds. Okay, 132 pounds. That's kind of where we started. So I did a bit of a mini cut for her, and then this is kind of where we started the prep phase, where basically increased growth hormone a fair bit. So we started around, she's running about 4 IUs, and this is when we started creeping up. So she's around 6 IUs of growth hormone at this current point in time. Okay. And then probably around here is when I titrated to about 8 IUs. So she's getting visibly leaner out, but her weight's actually the same. So she was started prep at 60. She was sitting around like 58 over here. And then going along here, this is where she's running about 8 IUs of growth hormone, where we're sticking. Now, you got to remember, she's 132 pounds, so her taking 8 IUs is probably the equivalent to me taking 16 IUs.
Yeah.
If you do it at body weight wise, okay? And now she's only 4 kilos or 8 pounds down from her starting weight. But, I mean, shit, guys.
That's nuts.
If I go side by side, hide, there you go. That's an 8 pound or 4 kilo difference. So I would argue muscle was gained.
Yeah.
I would argue muscle was gained and body fat was lost. And believe it or not, guys, we only did I lied. We did throughout this whole period, which was like over 6 months, we only did 2 cycles of actual androgens, which was 2.5 milligrams of Anavar with a total weekly dose of, I believe, 35 milligrams, I want to say. And then we used Primo at, I think, the highest dose was 37.5 milligrams, I believe. And that was only for 7 weeks and 8 weeks. That's it. The whole other time was non-virilizing compounds, because obviously being feminine is very important for her, and not virilizing. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good example of gaining muscle and losing fat. And that was literally just by, well, many things, but mainly I think the higher dose growth hormone, really focusing on the training aspect. Like I don't want to sound like, you know, every guy just train hard, but like legitimately, like ensuring objectively that we're progressively overloading. I think that's super important, because many people think they're training hard in a deficit, but they kind of just maintaining. And I think that's where you really need to push yourself. So literally checking that she's beating the logbook, so to speak, every goddamn week as much as we can in prep. And yeah, like, you know, we were worried about being big enough going into the show, but yeah, she's leaned out really nicely and gained muscle. And yeah, there you have it.
I'm curious, did she have any like notable effects from taking that high? I've never actually had a female take 8 IUs before. Was that like pretty innocuous for her, or was there any kind of effects?
You know, I thought the growth hormone was fake at one point, because she's got no carpal tunnel, no numbness on the hands, and I was like, oh, fuck, is this shit real? But I think it's literally because, again, obviously because she's my partner, I live with her, I've already been micromanaging the shit out of her, in the sense that in a good way, guys, in a bodybuilding way, that like I check yeah,
you're not gonna fucking eat this.
Yeah, literally, guys. Come live with me, you know. But like ensuring that her electrolytes are like on point, so that we, you know, she's having 5,000 milligrams of potassium, and her water intake's on point. So I literally think being really consistent with that, taking 5 grams of taurine, that I think mitigated a lot of the numbness or carpal tunnel. Sometimes it occurred, but like really, there's been no issues from that. The only thing that we had a slight bit of an issue was near the tail end of the 8 weeks of 37.5 milligrams of Primo. Her voice got like a little bit scratchy, so that's when we basically stopped it, voice returned to normal, with the scratchiness dissipated. That was the only notable side effect that she's got. Hasn't got any other side effects too, because I guess that like I mentioned before, that was a big goal of mine, where at least when it comes to females, my goal is to get them on stage, get them as lean as possible, get them as jacked as possible, but not virilize them. I'm not trying to throw shade here, guys, but if you're coaching females and you get them on stage and they just sound like a man, well, I think you're a shit coach, personally, because sure, you can get it. You can get a chick and throw a bunch of anabolics at her and get her to grow, sure, but like you've also potentially fucked up her chances of fertility, fucked up her voice. Don't get me wrong, if she doesn't have an issue with that and she just wants to be a female bodybuilder and she doesn't care about virilization, fair enough. But I think it's your duty to listen to your clients' goals, and most of them will be like, I don't want to be virilized. So then how are you going to get them on stage, and how are you going to get them the physique they want without fucking them up, basically?
Yeah, 1,000%. It's a really sad thing, actually. Like a lot of females go down the wrong path with that, and there's so many better ways to approach it, for sure. Started natty, just got into the dark side of bodybuilding, 6 pounds in a deficit. Wow. This is more water weight than anything. Likely. Yeah, I mean it's likely some intramuscular triglyceride or glycogen. You know, when you take a bunch of androgens, you do kind of super compensate in a glycogen kind of sense, and then every gram of glycogen that you're able to store is 3-ish, 4-ish grams of water. So, you
Correct,
know,
yeah.
if you even gain, let's just say you were able to compensate with like a pound or two more of glycogen, that's, you know, 4 pounds of water on top of that, so you're up 6 pounds, you know. So that's very possible. Also nitrogen retention, and then intramuscular water retention, right, which is the glycogen. So yeah. And muscle, I mean, it's, you're going to grow muscle. It's just I don't know how quickly you look at, obviously I think he's working with you.
Yeah, Preston is
Yeah.
2 weeks out. Is it 2 weeks now? Yes, 2 weeks out from his third show. And we compared the first two shows natural, and now he decides he wants to be, IFBB, NPC bodybuilder. So we are using a little bit of testosterone and a little bit of Masteron. And yeah, he's 6 pounds up, getting leaner, which is great.
How many weeks has he been on?
I believe like only 2 weeks, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks at most.
That's what's up, dude. That's what's up. Yeah, that's kind of, I would say that's a lot of that initial like non-genomic response, where you get a lot of that retention. Like you just hold so much more fullness within your muscle. That's awesome, dude. That's like in my opinion, that's like the best place to start your first cycle, when you're that shredded. I've seen this, dude, in your story. When you're that shredded and then you start cycles, dude, that's when it's the best. Like that's like the fucking peak of any bodybuilder's existence. That's sick. Felipe asks, how did you guys get started in the industry? Tell us your story. I've told this many times. I'll summarize very quickly, but I cerebral palsy, wanted to be more than I was, and competing in bodybuilding was the easiest way to represent myself in that capacity. And I always was fascinated with like muscle guys, right? And ever since I was a kid, I was just fascinated with this shit. And I was meal prepping in high school. In the senior year, I was eating like my own food and shit. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was just bringing my own food to school, and it was like meat and rice. Whatever I saw Ronnie Coleman eat was what I was literally eating. And it just kind of stuck, man. For my whole life, I just like loved competing. I joined the army, and then once I got done with like basic training and that shit, I did my first show, won my natural pro card. I was 19 years old, and then competed for like 6 or 7 more times after that. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just like history, man. It was like something for me. It was just something that was like my personality gravitates towards, because I'm very routine and habit driven. And then on top of that, it's like the one thing I can do with cerebral palsy that doesn't involve a ton of coordination or, a good proprioceptive mind. Like I don't have to catch a ball or swing a bat or any of that bullshit. I just have to flex my fucking muscles. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly different way. Mine was kind of similar in the sense that I'm originally from South Africa, if you guys didn't pick up the accent. And I played a lot of rugby, as all South Africans do. And then through playing rugby, I got into the gym. And then I was like 15 or 14 at the time. And then the more I trained in the gym, the more I was like, fuck rugby. I think this is way better. And actually, kind of for similar reasons you said, like it didn't involve coordination, it didn't involve a team. It is something I could do by myself. And I just enjoyed weight training and building the physique. And I'd started, I guess, bodybuilding at like 15, and it just continued on. So much so that I just learned more and more and more. I mean, I started researching PEDs, funny enough, almost immediately, because back where I was from in South Africa, it was like, I think we spoke about this before, like PED use in high schools in South Africa is like rampant, which is not a good thing, thing by all means. But so I started researching, not using, but researching PEDs almost immediately. And it was probably about 5-6 years before I ever touched PEDs. Like 20 years old. I still think I was too young at the point, not because age reasons, and also think maturity reasons, if I'm being completely honest, and also knowledge wise. But started using PEDs like early 20s, and then realized, hey, I need to do this properly. So when stopped and was natural for a time, but continued on bodybuilding. And that's when, people started approaching me just about like building muscle and things like that. And I basically coached for free for years through university, and even, into my career when I was an accountant post university. And basically decided one day that I'm fucking sick of accounting. I'm sick of law, because that's what I did. That's why I'm qualified in law and accounting. And I've been coaching people for years at that point, and kind of had to have a cap on my roster because I couldn't coach more than 10 people for free. So I kind of had like the 10 best people rotating in and out, and then basically quit all that and started scaling my roster. And actually, that's how I met Colton. Colton got me on a call, and then wanted to coach me, and then was like, "Oh, this guy's actually not our word."
Yeah, it's like, this guy's smart as shit.
It's like, "You want to work for me?" I was like, "Fuck yeah!" And then that's how we got here now.
Yeah, that was funny. It was like, you were like, "I want to hire a coach." I'm like, you know what? You're the only person I've heard talk about drugs like I can, and then like actually understand the mechanism and stuff. I was like, I need help. Like, we need help. Tested titanium could be half water, half muscle. Depends on how good your diet is. I would agree with that. Why is it that some people respond to certain anabolic compounds to better than other anabolic compounds? I've heard recently a guy didn't respond to NPP, switched to EQ, and had serious results. I mean, I think when people say respond poorly, there could be a lot of different things. And it also means, like, did you respond poorly in the sense of side effects or in growth? I would argue that most people are going to respond the same to most compounds. It's just the side effects that vary for them. And sometimes those side effects take away the glare of like growing lots of muscle. 100%. So for me, like, trends sounds good and it looks good in paper. And like, apparently Kurt's, saying 800 milligrams of Tren is like common and shit. I struggle at 70. I struggle at 35 milligrams. Like, that's like something for me that I just don't enjoy and I can't do. So for me, that's what I mean when I'd say it doesn't respond well for me. So I have to use something else. But I don't necessarily buy into the whole growth thing has changed. I think that more so it's just the off-targeted effects that result in someone experiencing less of a positive affect from whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree there too. So in this example here, I don't think he would not have been growing from NPP. I definitely think there would have been a growth response. I think that's biologically impossible for there not to be some growth response. But I think, as Colton said, he probably did not get good side effects from it, and therefore not responding to him was that he didn't get. He was basically getting a shit ton of side effects. Also, like, EQ has a very long half-life and takes a while to reach peak serum concentration level. So, like, that's why I'd be very skeptical if he was like taking MPP, stop 2 weeks later, start pitting EQ a week later. It's like, EQ's working. It's like,
it's not really.
You probably just what happened was the eventually because MPP is a shorter half-life, that sort of has left your system for the most part, and you're no longer experiencing the side effects, no longer feel shit. And we're just able to train hard in the gym. It's like, sometimes I see guys go from a high dose of androgens, either halve the dose or even drop the TRT, and they think they're improving and they're getting better and stronger in the gym. Like, I feel better. It's like, no, just because you don't not have a shitload of inflammation, just because you're not, blasting anymore, you actually just feel healthier and therefore perform better.
Yeah. And I also agree with what Mitch says here too, probably because EQ makes you eat like crazy, and I can attest to that. I would say, that's another big factor. What was this individual doing during both of those phases? Because he could have been cutting on one drug and then bulking on another drug, or he could have been bulking on one drug, which was just him eating like bullshit, and then him getting really regimented on another drug and then having like really radically improved effects. I would say that's true for myself. Like, when I was in Thailand, I was on a bunch of EQ and a bunch of testosterone. I didn't really grow much. Oh, we don't know if it was like real or like whatever.
I'm still convinced it wasn't real.
There could be some skepticism there, but I also wasn't like super on top of like eating 6 meals a day, like, super dedicated. I was more on the coach mode thing, but I was still training hard and doing all this shit. But alternatively, like, the best growth I've ever had in a cycle was 300 milligrams of testosterone, 300 milligrams of NPP, and 300 milligrams of Masteron. Very small compared to what I've ran. So I'd say it's also probably correlated to what that individual is doing and how regimented they were at the moment they were doing it. So,
And also, I will say, I do think there's a huge variance when it comes to tolerance of side effects and genetic response. We've spoken about this before. I have a friend / client who legitimately ran 700 plus milligrams of testosterone, and his estradiol was in range. I genuinely cannot tell you why. All I can think of is He's someone who naturally just stays very lean. Like the dude struggles to put on any body fat. His estradiol historically has always been in range. I think he's almost never had high estradiol. And he responds really well to compounds that aromatize. And he's an individual where aromatizing compounds work really, really well. But then you get me, who even like looks at a Violet test and like my E2 starts spiking. So there is that individual response that you have to take into account.
Yeah, 1000%. Timmy asks, do AAS really make you infertile? I want to be enhanced, but also want healthy children. They won't. So I shouldn't say something so objectively. They could, but the cases in which I have seen that are absolutely zero. And I see and talk to a lot of people in this industry. The Ronnie Coleman, one of the biggest bodybuilders ever to exist, has, I always love using this. He has like 8 kids, and this is all while he was bodybuilding. So I've never actually seen anyone on cycle who's had 0 sperm. I've never seen anyone on cycle who wasn't able to regain like super physiological sperm metrics with a little bit of HCG, HMG. So I would say that for most people, you're probably safe. As long as, if you're really concerned about it, I would stay away from like progestogenic drugs like Trenbolone and Nandrolone, but even in ment, but even then you're, it's like the ment failed as a drug for, it was meant to be a male anti-contraceptive, and it failed because males were still fertile while using it. So it's pretty hard to say that, you know, they make you infertile, but there is the chance that like the oxidative stress in your testicles could cause scarring, and that could inhibit, you know, having kids.
To maybe answer your question in a different way, Timmy, if you are concerned about fertility, what I would personally do is, one, have a rough time frame of when you want to have kids. I know, let's say you are 27 and you want to have kids, I don't know, in your mid-30s. If money is no issue, okay, you can go and get your sperm frozen. Okay, now bear in mind that it does degrade over time. So if you're 25, you want kids at 35, 10-year time frame would be a bit lot. But from my understanding, speaking to an endocrinologist and a gynecologist, because I actually looked into this for myself, 5 years is about the time frame you want. So I would potentially go freezing your sperm, and if you do have a female partner, you can actually freeze embryos. But they actually get the sperm and get the egg fertilized and actually freeze the whole embryo, and that can be a very surefire option. But as also Colton said, we can't unequivocally sit here and go, if you take anabolics, you're not going to become, you're not going to have fertility issues. That's very hard to do. What you can also do is test your, fertility parameters, get your sperm count and see what it is now. Okay, because if it is very poor now, going on anabolics is probably not going to be good for your fertility levels. But even if your fertility is poor now, there's a lot of fertility protocols you can do to upregulate it, because many individuals who've never used anabolics, have a poor diet, low testosterone, don't exercise well, their sperm count is probably horrendous, and worse than people using anabolics, maybe. Okay, so I would basically just do a lot of fertility testing, and then when it comes to using anabolics, unfortunately, everything is, you can't have your cake and eat it too, in the sense that everything has a trade-off or a risk. But as Colton said, I mean, the amount of guys I know who's been on cycle taking tren and had kids, like I can name 5 or 6, off the top of my head. So I do think if you're sticking around like, just testosterone and TRT, the chances of you becoming infertile, I think, are very, very low. And the thing is, you can also, whilst on TRT, use fertility protocols like HMG, HCG, recombinant allase, FSH to boost fertility. And worst case scenario, you can completely cycle off, do a post-cycle therapy, restore your endogenous testosterone, do a fertility protocol, and then have kids. So yes, I think it's very possible to have kids, but also it's very possible that you may be one of the unlucky few who have really poor fertility, which gets worse.
Nicholas, unfortunately, she is not Thai, so
but there are lots of them, so come visit us.
There's more than there could be that you can ever. It's crazy.
They're waiting for you, and there's lady boys too. So
and the lady boys are really waiting. They will be there.
They are. They will chase you.
What does NASM certified fitness trainer mean? Have you heard of Go Be fears disruptor. And I've never heard of that, but the NASM certified trainer is just it's basically an online course. Like I'm a NASM certified trainer, an ACE certified trainer, like all these different institutions which basically classify or give people certifications that they've gone through a specific kind of training. It's no different than if you were to work in like a bar, you need to go through some sort of, you know, alcohol management course or something like this, or food safety course, and you get a certification. Very similar to that. A lot of gyms will recommend them for in-person trainers or want to see them on resumes. They don't necessarily mean anything of great accolade, though. They're not something that, you know, pronounces someone better than another trainer. It's a fucking 2-hour long course you go through, and then you do a test and you get it. And I did it because it was easy, and I was like, oh, I might as well get it. Maybe I'll need it for something. Never needed it. You know, it's not something that matters.
They have similar things in Australia where I think they call them like certificates, and they have something called TAFE, which is basically, or the American version would be like you don't get university, what you get like a technical college.
We call that we call that like a community college or something.
Yeah, like a community college, yeah, and you can get similar certificates, you know, to the NASM one to be able to work as a PT in a gym in person. Yeah, I have some strong opinions on that, but I'll keep it to myself.
Yeah, they're not really. They don't have a good track record. They're not really amazing coaches, unfortunately. So.
Let's just say I can print one.
Yeah. They're not so great. There is people who have like CSCS certifications, which are the most like the highest level in America, the highest level certification you can get. We actually had a coach on our team, Coach Tito, who had one. And he showed me the course material. It's not that crazy. You just need to know a little bit of biomechanics, and like this is stuff you could really learn as a person who's just interested if you really wanted to. Casey, if you do not get side effects from Tren, can it be beneficial running 50 to 100 milligrams in a building phase to help with IGF-1? I'm assuming he's referring to lowering IGF-1 binding globulin, which Tren does have notability in doing. It can be. We've talked about it before. It's an anti-catabolic agent for us more than anything, like not necessarily a building agent. So if you work in a really stressful job, you get really lackluster sleep, you move a ton. It could be something that's useful. I really don't classify it as particularly useful outside of that, especially considering like the cognitive effects.
I think, I agree. I think personally, you know, using something like Tren, you know, to assist with IGF-1 is sort of like using a shitload of Lantus to assist with GH and IGF-1. It's like, it's a very minor indirect effect. And the other side effects associated with the drug, I think completely offset that. You know, my argument would be like, why don't you just use some growth hormone?
Yeah,
exactly. That's gonna increase IGF-1 a lot more than just using a little bit of Tren. And I would argue the potential side effects and, you know, deleterious effects to your health markers on Tren are going to be completely offset by that. So yeah, like if you want to stay leaner and increase IGF-1, growth hormone, literally just increase the dose. If you either use growth hormone or increase the dose, and I would say that would have a much more beneficial effect than 50 to 100 milligrams of Tren.
Yeah, that and I just don't see it being a sustainable long-term move, especially if this is something you plan on being like if you want a physique that you can sustain easily without causing health detriments, like growth hormone would be a very exceptional way to do that, as opposed to using Tren year round, for example. That would just be horrible.
And take this with a massive bucket of salt, because I'm a sample size of 1, but I use just testosterone replacement therapy dose of testosterone. I think it was like, okay, it was a little bit high. It was like 200 to 250 milligrams of testosterone, but a amount where I wouldn't see, you know, serious deleterious effects to my health markers. My blood work I got beforehand, it was great. Then I basically used 35 milligrams to 70 milligrams of Tren Ace for, I believe it was like 8+ weeks. Got my blood work done, and it was pretty horrible in terms of my lipids and, you know, even my C-reactive protein, things like that. And so, at least for myself, I found that almost any dose of Tren is deleterious, and that was an experiment I did with myself. So if you really want to try, as I say to everyone, get your blood work now, put in 50 milligrams of Tren, get your blood work in 8 weeks, and I would almost put money on it that it would, you know, be significantly, I guess, deteriorate, or at least, not be better or not improve. And then, as Colton and I touched on previously, well, what stops growth phases? Well, your health markers becoming shit or getting too fat, which arguably is your health markers also getting shit. So that's what I'm saying. I think that would just cut your off-season phase shorter.
Yeah, 1000%. It's a good point too. I think we have a long string of questions, like one big question. Hi, Colton.
Holy fuck.
Hi, Colton and Adam. Love the podcast. Lots of respect for you guys. I have been on TRT
Thanks,
for 6 months at 175 milligrams per week, injecting every day, 6 foot, 185, body fat somewhere between 12 and 13%. Began dealing with light high E2 side effects after a couple of months. E2 labs came back at 58, tender nipples, body acne, decline in mood, etc. Then began taking calcium diglucarates at 1,000 milligrams per day and DIM. No noticeable improvement in symptoms after 6 weeks. Had tested my E2 again. It came back at 62. Fast forward, and I wanted to titrate my dosage of test to 250 milligrams, daily injections, discontinue calcium diglucarate and DIM, and replace it with anastrozole at 25 milligrams every other, or 0.25 milligrams at every other day. I have always been quite sensitive to drugs, to the point I feel like my E2 is going up and down on a daily basis, considerably more acne than before, mood swinging throughout the day, hunger is through the roof, even if I'm eating in a 400 calorie surplus. I'm patiently waiting my sensitive E2 results, though they're still 2 weeks away. Any advice on what I can do in the meantime, i.e. increase, decrease testosterone? So I have a lot of suggestions here.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. So one, if you're willing to increase the dose of testosterone, I'll kind of go by like series of, I think, importance. One, it seems like maybe it's not the estrogen causing the side effects as much as it is elevated androgens, because if your estradiol is within, 5 picograms of what it was before, but you're experiencing more aggravation, more sort of acne development, these things on a higher dose of testosterone, but relatively the same amount of estradiol. I don't know, man. Like, that's typically my thought would be it's not necessarily estradiol. I find that androgens more so stimulate acne and mood deviations than does estrogen. If your libido is still really strong, if you're still able to get hard and all these other things, I would say that estrogen isn't the problem. Of course, you want to get it within physiological range, but I wouldn't point that as the direct issue. What could be the case is you're maybe a poor responder to testosterone, which is a very viable option. I don't find many people are at that dose, but it could be a real thing. So what I personally would do, the process of elimination would be get your labs back after taking this 0.25 milligrams of anastrozole every day, or every other day, and see what your estradiol is. Do that before anything, because you want concrete results of where you're currently at. The next thing I would do is, if your nipples are still sensitive after getting those results back and your estradiol is, still at 60 picograms per milliliter or whatever it is, what I would do is take a SERM, like a Nolvadex, immediately, just to tame the nipple sensitivity so you don't develop any further gynecomastia. And then I would, let's say your estradiol was the issue. I would then probably take out 100 milligrams of testosterone, add in 100 milligrams of Primo. I would get real Remobolin. It costs $20 a week to do 1 ampule. And that would be your cycle. The second option was, if you're really going ho on 250 milligrams of testosterone, it would be to increase the anastrozole dose. I would actually prefer you're using exemestane or aromacin at 12.5 milligrams, probably 3 times per week, just to see kind of what's happening. So those are kind of the 2 options I would go down as a path, or 3.
I think we're going to have to get someone else with a differing opinion, because I swear you just said, I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking the exact same thing. Exactly what Colton said. So you sound like myself, where, I found, especially when I was younger and I started using testosterone, I would aromatize it very fucking easy. And a dose like this, literally 175 milligrams a week, I would probably aromatize on this too. So as Colton said, you're already doing daily injections, which is great. Okay, microdosing that, splitting it out, more peak semi-concentration levels, less fluctuation. So you tick that off the box, which is good. As Colton said, definitely I would be getting a SERM if you're getting nipple sensitivity. You don't want gynecomastia. You don't want to have to get cut out, although I feel for many people that might be an inevitability. But get on a SERM ASAP, raloxifene or tamoxifen. 20 milligrams per day in tamoxifen, I would say. Also, one thing I want to say, because I experienced this myself, is the symptoms you're experiencing could be indicative of high estradiol, but also low estradiol, because you're using 0.25 EOD of anastrozole, and it's pretty damn potent. So much so that, I would maybe think that, okay, it also could be crushing your estradiol, because you could have had high estradiol previously, okay? You start using that, and now it's crushing because you haven't got an LCMS estradiol test. Obviously, you're waiting on the results. And I've seen it before with estradiol being wildly out of range. You get an LCMS test, and it's smack bang in the middle of the reference range. And if you're taking, a fair bit of AI at that point, you could be crushing it. So, unfortunately, I think that, as Colin said, the best thing would be is get on a SOM, drop the dose of testosterone, add in 100 milligrams of a DHT derivative, whether it be Masteron or Primo, and just make sure it's real. Okay, make sure it's real. Wait on the LCMS estradiol test, and then depending on what the results are, so if the results come back as low, okay, because there's that possibility, you can then look at either decreasing the amount of DHT derivative or slightly increasing the dose of testosterone. If it comes back high, then again, I would increase the dose of DHT derivative. I'm not a fan of using aromatase inhibitor chronically. Yes, in intermittent use like this to acutely bring down estradiol in the short term, yeah, that's fine. But as Colin said, you probably want a suicide aromatase inhibitor like exemestane. Okay, there's going to be no rebound effect, because if you just take an anastrozole and you stop taking it, if your estradiol is still high, it's just going to remain high and rebound. It blocks estradiol from binding to the androgen receptor. It doesn't actually reduce aromatization. So that is what I would also do. But basically, man, as I said to everyone, you're kind of just speculating until you actually get the lab work back. So get on a SERM, reduce the amount of testosterone, use a DHT derivative, and then wait for the LCMS estradiol test to occur. And I'd say probably even book a follow-up test after 4 weeks to make sure that it's in range and it's stabilized once you have the DHT derivative and testosterone in place and dialed in. And as also Colin said, when it comes to acne, I also have to agree there too. Sometimes it's not related to estradiol, where I've seen it before. Guys just start using testosterone. In fact, I have a client like this now, where we, trying to get. To be fair, his previous coach he worked with and his blood work was not very good, but he definitely is sensitive to testosterone in the sense that he has a huge hormonal and acne response from that. You might, if your acne is quite bad, require you to go to a dermatologist and maybe look at getting something like an isotretinoin or something like that to help deal with the oil from the sebaceous glands, because that will increase when using testosterone. Again, we discussed how everyone has different side effects. You could be an individual who, when you take testosterone, if you already have oily skin, it just that much upregulates oil production. In fact, that happened to me where I had oily skin. Using testosterone increased that oil production, and I had to use a low dose of an Accutane to basically help reduce that oil production to keep skin in check. So I would say fix the hormones, but also address the skin, because if it continues to get worse, you don't want to be that guy with crazy acne and then acne scarring. So get on top of that ASAP. And if that requires going to see a dermatologist, see one. But just also have in mind that if you do tell them you're taking testosterone, hopefully it is prescribed, they might be a bit reluctant to help, or they might just be like, get off the test. So just make sure that you're phrasing that appropriately to them.
Yeah, 1,000%. Bogdan Sav, experiences with stacking orals in the pre-workout for synergistic effects. Oral pre-workout.
Good one.
Yeah. Not really. I mean, Innovor and Tyranobol is what I've had people do in the past, just as like an experiment.
100 milligram Nandrolone, 100 milligram D-bol, 100 milligram methyl.
Yeah, just take all of them. Go Power Rangers, bro. Just all colors of the fucking rainbow.
Yeah. Look, Bogdan Sav. Like I say with everything, man, what would be the purpose? Like, are you like an elite level powerlifter or strongman where like you just want to fucking lift as heavy weight as possible, no matter what? Yeah, maybe there might be a use case for it, but I would almost argue that most orals have a similar effect, and you can just increase the dose of one of them. But for bodybuilding purposes, I think that's just a recipe for disaster. I think stick to, if you are going to use an oral, one oral sublingually, more like a Nandrolone or a Trenbolone. I do think, Anadrol, I know, Cole, you used it before, and it's not like I'm completely against it. I just find that most people, especially when they're doing orally, not sublingually, just fucks up their blood pressure.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really give any good long-term results. So, long story short, I wouldn't be stacking orals. Actually, no, sorry, he has a second question. T-ball/bar, 20, 30 milligrams each. Had a better training session than either compound or isolation. Curious about possible synergistic effects and other potential combinations you guys experimented with. Okay, so I don't think it was the combination. I think just using more orals. Like I think if you just doubled the dose of T-ball or Anavar, it would have given you a similar effect. I don't think they're going to have unique synergistic properties. Yes, both definitely have an effect on strength, and T-ball specifically, I think it was developed for the Olympics in East Germany back in the day. So I think that one's really good for sports performance. But remember, what are the outcomes you're looking for? Like, are you a weightlifter? Are you a strongman? You're just looking to increase performance for bodybuilding hypertrophy purposes. I don't think it's super beneficial. I just think stick to one or both, but it's just the equivalent of increasing. It's like saying to me, it's like the previous question, right? Is there going to be a benefit for combining Masteron and Primo? No, you can probably just scale both one or the other, and it's the total anabolics which matter. So I would say 60 milligrams is going to be the same as 30 milligrams each.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I've definitely heard the anecdotes of synergy between Trenbolone and Anavar. Nothing to back that, but if you like it, that's the biggest thing that matters. That's the biggest.
If you like it, blood works fine. Yeah.
Atlas shrugged. Besides crashing estrogen, what are other negative effects of AIs? Would you prefer adding something like Primo? We kind of just answered this. Yeah, I would. if I had the opportunity to, right, and we didn't have like a dose cap for someone that was some random number, I would just say if you're aromatizing too much at this dose, maybe back off the testosterone dose and then add Primo, or maintain the testosterone dose if it's not horrible and add Primo, just because you're adding another anabolic as opposed to a different drug that's doing something on a completely different tangent. And then, if you need to use an AI, you can use it. It's not horrible, but ideally you would use something that is more long-term representative of like a good, healthy choice.
Yeah, we're not against using AIs. We're not against using AIs acutely in the short term. I just think it's not a good tool for long-term management of estradiol for a multitude of reasons. Like one, I actually think it's much more difficult to dial in the dose of an aromatase inhibitor with your dose of androgen. I think it's actually much easier to use a ratio of DHT to testosterone to dial it in. And then secondly, most of the negative effects around AIs are more about when one crashes your estradiol. But there is some evidence suggesting that it's deleterious effects on lipid health, deleterious effects on bone health in extreme cases. But again, it's more so with low estradiol. There's been cases of people, with osteoporosis. But again, I think that's like people who either had that already or had very low estradiol chronically. I don't think you take an AI, you're going to get osteoporosis. But I don't think it. But in saying that, I don't think it's the greatest thing for your bone and joint health, especially if you are inadvertently crashing it. So yeah, again, our approach is, or our suggestion is, you have high estradiol in the short term and it's really high, use an AI to just bring it into range. But long-term usage, I would look at a DHT derivative or frequent shots of testosterone or lowering the dose of testosterone to control, AI or E2 long-term.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Seb. Yeah, I think that's probably the best course of action. I would get your blood work done, take a serum, and then mess with the doses from there.
Thanks, bro. That's 2 vials of Primo.
Yeah.
Not 2 vials, so 2 ampules. Sorry,
ampules.
Thank you for the ampules.
Just joining in on, but based on the AI comment, is there any typical amount the average individual should run to start with? Say 1 milligram of anastrozole per week, split 0.5 Monday, Thursday, went on 400 milligrams of test. No, it is all inter-individual. Like I said, literally, I'm not even kidding you guys. This is with testovirin from the pharmacy. I can take upwards of 1 gram of testosterone, have zero issues with aromatization, zero, like nothing. I know other people like Adam who really struggle with aromatization. It is just completely individual. If I was to do that, even at 1 gram of testosterone, my estrogen, which would be at like 50 to 40 picograms at 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, would be through the ground. Like I would be wrecked. Whereas for Adam, honestly, that might be too little to even manage your estrogen at that kind of dose. So it's so different.
And to further that point, I'll try to give you something more precise. Base it on your E2 levels. So if you're taking 400 milligrams of testosterone, you get an LCMS estradiol test, and your E2 is at like 100. Okay, yeah, you might require a higher dose of AI. Again, I'm a bigger fan of the suicide inhibitors like Romacin. I don't know why anastrozole is way more common in TRT clinics. Maybe someone more familiar or smarter would know. I don't know why they just hand that shit out like candy. But I would base it off what your estradiol sitting at. For example, if your estradiol sitting at 42, just slightly above the reference range, I probably wouldn't use an AI. I would look at, am I experiencing estrogenic side effects? So base it on where your estradiol is at, where I would say if it's slightly above the reference range, a little bit, like, okay, if I'm giving you a specific dose, let's say if you put a gun to me and Adam, give me a dosage, I would say, okay, if someone had an estradiol between 40 and 60, maybe 0.5 milligrams of an anastrozole twice per week, or 12.5 milligrams of Romacin every 4 to 5 days. Okay, and we base it on how they feel and follow up testing. If it is like wildly out of range, like let's say, I don't know, 100 plus, then I would say a more aggressive dosing, maybe something like 12.5 milligrams of Romacin every other day or something along those lines. And again, I'm going to base on blood work, so we'll probably run it for 2-3 weeks, get blood work, see where it's at, and then adjust based on that.
Yeah. And the important thing to note too is, like, if you do have estrogenic side effects, you're not going to grow gyno overnight. So you can wait a week and get labs and see what happens, and it's not going to be the end of the world.
Yeah. And my favorite term, right? Just have some tamoxifen on hand. I mean, I don't know, I think there was like a meme on the forums back in the day. It's like, what do you have on hand? Like, always have, it was like ingrained, and you always have Romacin and Nolvadex on hand.
It's like a necessity, because you just pop one and then the effects of the estrogen's still there, but it's neutralized. It doesn't have an effect on receptor site. Casey, I think PH is the Philippines. Let me know if that's wrong, but
bro, there's lots of sources of cheap GH in the Philippines.
I was gonna say, we have definitely
join the Discord.
Ton McGiver, I'm ramping up tests with no AI, feeling great at 450 milligrams a week with 4 IUs of GH daily, but before bed, it seems better than the previous experiences running another compound with test. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, we just talked about that on repeat, basically, and you might not have been tuned in for it, but basically our method is moderate androgens, growth hormone. And I think using, in a perfect world, if you're someone who's interested, and we've also talked about this a lot, if you're someone who's interested in just being like better than normal, testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin / IGF-1 is like the best combination you can run, because they're relatively innocuous. You can run them at controlled doses, and the endpoints of each of them, because they're endogenous hormones as well. So yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that's a great cycle.
One thing I will say though is, just check your estradiol, simply because a lot of people will be like, I feel great, but unfortunately, don't get me wrong, your feedback is important, but it's not really objective. And I've had it before where clients are like, I feel wonderful. We test, their blood work and see the estradiol is wildly out of range. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's anything wrong with having a slightly higher estradiol, as long as you're not getting estrogenic side effects. But again, I wouldn't want someone with a very high estradiol, even if they feel fine. I'd rather keep it in range, or roughly within range. So just get some blood work done, just to make sure that you're not heavily aromatizing, because the side effects may not be apparent immediately. Just to show that you're fine at that dose of testosterone.
Yeah, 1000%. C sips, low dose long cycles under 300 milligrams total per week, or high dose short cycles.
High dose long cycles.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would have put a cap at 300 milligrams, even close to it. I'd say that if you're starting out, that's a great dose. Watch my first cycle video to get more of a detailed explanation on that. But the premise would be, use the dose that's effective for you for the longest amount of time that you possibly can. 12 weeks, even at a fucking radically high dose, is still a pretty short amount of time. And because by the time you're putting it in, 5 weeks later, you have serum concentrations that are representative of the amount of drugs you're taking. Then you have 6-7 weeks to actually be on those drugs, and then you take them out. So There's no good amp. If I was talking to the most general people, I'd say 300 milligrams total per week for the rest of your life. Like if you want to get linear gains for a long time, like that's probably the way to go. Alternatively, you could do high doses for short cycles, but the amplitude of health impacts is going to be very high, and the reward for those health impacts is going to be very low due to the time of exposure just being low.
Yeah. And to further add to that, like, doses are relative. Like, don't get wrong, we can probably all agree that like 5,000 milligrams is a high dose, but it's relative to where you're at. I would argue that if you're just starting out the gym, well, I don't think you need PEDs, but let's say you're like, very, don't have much muscle mass, 300 milligrams is a lot. 300 milligrams is a lot. And you should be basing your dosage, or rather your titrations of your dosage, based on your progress. And we've spoken about this before, where if you're finding that you're increasing food and your body composition is getting softer or worse, so to speak, you're not seeing improvements or strength gains in the gym besides increasing food, then you make a titration of your total dosage. And you shouldn't have the mindset like, oh, I'm going to do 300 milligrams or 600 milligrams for 12 weeks, or I'm going to do 300 milligrams indefinitely. As we've said before, I would say start on the least, I would start on the lowest effective dose to grow, like 300 milligrams. I think that's a pretty good point. And then titrate as needed. And then if you run into health issues, that's when you pull back. So I would say, long story short, longer cycle with an as needed dosage. And that's going to be different for everyone. If you're an IFBB pro and you want to get an Olympia invite, it's probably going to be a lot more than the guy who's just trying to get, jacked and is, I don't know, 6 years into lifting or something like that.
Right. 1000%. I'm going to take one more question, and then we got to bounce, which is, I'll do two. High E2 causes varicose veins? Probably not. DECA, you mentioned it might have neurotoxicity. Is that even at low doses? From what research there's a really great study, and I recommend anyone read it. This is pretty conclusive, but yeah, it seems to be not so great in terms of the effects on locomotion, reproductive behaviors, aggression, learning, and memory. And they did a really expansive study here, which is super cool. And it goes through all of the materials that we would be using and referencing. So highly suggest reading this. But from what it seems like, even low doses are like 15 milligrams per kilogram, which is quite a bit. But it's in rats. So don't take this for, everything, but there is human studies in here as well. But in this study, for instance, 15 milligrams per kilogram isn't like an insane dose for a lot of bodybuilders. 10 to 50 milligrams for 8 weeks. That was on rats, but still, like very low doses seem to have pretty profound effects within cognitive function. So it's generally not something I like to mess with personally.
I agree. Like, again, I'm not trying to like demonize certain drugs because everyone has a different response, but I would say for the average person, your 19-nor derivatives, like the further you stray away from testosterone, the more side effects you're going to get, basically. Where, things like 19-nors, I just think for most individuals are going to cause issues. And sorry, just going back to Kip's answer, does high E2 cause varicose veins? I agree, no. But if you have high E2 causing you to have high blood pressure, that could cause varicose veins.
That's a good point.
That's a good point. Yeah. So just keep that in mind. So check your blood pressure.
Yeah. All right, guys. Damn, dude. I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much.
Another ampule. Thank you very much.
Yeah, another ampule. And then we got some Canadian dollars here.
Thank you, guys. I can run a gram. Thank you. You paid for the cycle. Your donations determine my cycle. How many super chats is how many ampules I'm using? Thank you, guys.
How many grams can I afford to run a week based on this?
That's our new stream. The dose is based on the donations, and then we have to stream myself going to the pharmacy, getting the ampules, and that's the cycle for the week.
Yep.
We'll take one more cycle. Was that shit on Twitch like Pokemon Go? Twitch plays Pokemon Go.
That would be wild.
Twitch determines my cycle. YouTube determines my cycle.
That would be so great. You're just sitting outside of a pharmacy every $5. Yeah. All right, fuck. You grabbed another one.
You got to pin it on stream.
All right, guys. I appreciate you being here. Stick for next week. Stick around. And if you haven't already, join the Discord. We will answer questions in there always as well. And we'll have constant supervision. So if you have anything that we didn't get done here and you want more in depth, the Discord is a great place to do that. Thanks, guys.
Take care.